They thought they'd found an easy mark, a quiet old man riding the bus. What they didn't realize was that this man was a hardened Vietnam veteran with life lessons they'd never forget. It was an ordinary afternoon on a city bus headed downtown Baltimore. The air inside was thick, crowded with passengers eager to get home. Conversations hummed faintly, interspersed with the occasional screech of brakes. Near the front, an elderly black man took a seat. His weathered hands rested on a cane, its age matching his own. His clothes were modest, a worn jacket and pressed slacks, suggesting someone who valued respect over flash. He didn't draw much attention, blending into the city's everyday scenery. But something about him was different. He sat with his back straight, his gaze steady, like a man unbowed by life's burdens. Yet a faint crease in his brow hinted at a history of challenges. A group of teenagers, loud and full of bravado, boarded the bus and moved toward the back. Their laughter was sharp, their movements filled with the careless confidence of youth. One of them, a lanky boy in a bright red hoodie, spotted the old man. His eyes glimmered, not with respect, but with mischief. He nudged his friends and whispered, sparking a round of snickers. The man stayed silent, gazing out the window at the blurred city streets. If he heard the murmurs, he gave no sign. But the boys weren't content with silence. They wanted a reaction. "Hey, old man," Red Hoodie's voice cut through the murmur of the bus. "Lose your walk?" The man's fingers tightened ever so slightly around his cane, but his face stayed calm. Slowly he turned his head, his steady gaze locking onto the boys. In that moment, something shifted. There was no anger or fear in his eyes, just a quiet, unshakable strength that seemed to fill the air. For a brief second, the boy hesitated, but his pride pushed him forward. The laughter from his friends grew louder, echoing off the bus walls. "What's the matter, old man? Too good to talk to us?" Red Hoodie leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mockery. Another boy, stocky with a backward cap, chimed in. "Bet he can't even hear us. Needs a hearing aid, huh?" Still, the man stayed silent, his cane now firmly placed between his knees. His weathered hands gripped the wood just a little tighter. Across the aisle, a young woman glanced at the boys, then quickly looked back at her phone. A man in a suit adjusted his tie and buried his face deeper into his newspaper. The unspoken message was clear. No one wanted to intervene. Red Hoodie sneered at the silence. "Look at him," he said, turning to his friends. "Thinks he's too good for us. What are you, some kind of king?" "Yeah," another boy laughed. "You gonna knight us with that cane, Grandpa?" Their taunts grew bolder, fueled by the man's quiet demeanor and the passengers' unwillingness to step in. The old man shifted slightly, his head tilting as if remembering something distant. "Say something," Red Hoodie snapped, irritation creeping into his tone. "What's wrong? You scared?" The bus jolted to a stop at a red light, momentarily silencing the boys. And then the man finally spoke. His voice was steady, low, and firm. "Respect is a lesson some people only learn the hard way." The old man's words were calm, but carried a weight that silenced the bus. For a moment, the teenagers glanced at each other, unsure how to respond. Red Hoodie, unwilling to lose face, quickly covered his unease with bravado. "Oh, so now you're talking," he sneered, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Respect, huh? That's rich coming from someone too scared to stand up for himself." The man turned slightly, locking eyes with the boy. His gaze was steady, calm, and piercing. "You think strength is loud, don't you?" he said. "You've got no idea what real strength looks like." The bus fell silent, every passenger now fully tuned in to the unfolding confrontation. Even the boys' friends seemed unsure, their laughter fading into uneasy smirks. As the bus lurched forward with the light turning green, Red Hoodie leaned closer, his posture brimming with mock intimidation. "Why don't you show us, then? Let's see how strong you are." The old man let out a slow, deliberate exhale as if centering himself. His calm, unshakable eyes met the boys, and it was clear that this wasn't just a lesson for the boy. It was a moment the entire bus would remember. The atmosphere inside felt heavy, the tension thick enough to weigh on everyone. The man remained seated, his cane steady in his hands, but his mind wandered. Unbidden, he was pulled back to a different time, to a different fight. Years ago, he had stood in the sweltering, humid jungles of Vietnam. The air there had been alive with the sounds of helicopters and gunfire, each moment a fight for survival. He had been young then, barely older than the boy in front of him now, but war had aged him, hardened him, and taught him lessons that could never be unlearned. He remembered the faces of his brothers in arms, men who had fought beside him, many of whom hadn't made it back. Their laughter in the quiet moments, their stories of home, were fragments he carried with him even now. The bus jolted over a pothole, pulling him back to the present. Straightening in his seat, he tightened his grip on the cane. He didn't feel anger. Anger was an emotion he'd long learned to temper. What he felt now was something deeper, a quiet responsibility to correct the arrogance in front of him. Red Hoodie interrupted his thoughts with a sharp, mocking laugh. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue again?" The man didn't respond immediately. His gaze flicked over the boy, taking in the bravado, the posture, the false confidence of someone who had never faced a real challenge. He had seen it before. Young soldiers who believed themselves untouchable, only to learn otherwise on the battlefield. "You remind me of someone I used to know," the man finally said, his voice steady and deliberate. "Oh, yeah?" Red Hoodie scoffed, trying to sound unaffected. "Who's that? One of your war buddies?" The man leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "No," he replied. "A young soldier who thought he was invincible. Life taught him he wasn't." Red Hoodie snorted, but the confidence in his laugh wavered. His friends, too, were quieter now, their earlier grins slipping away. "Whatever, old man," the boy muttered, his tone defensive. "Nobody cares about your war stories." The man's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but of understanding. "Careful, son," he said. "Sometimes those stories are the only thing standing between you and the same mistakes." The words lingered, silencing the boy momentarily. Even the bus seemed to move quieter, as though acknowledging the gravity of the moment. But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer, leaning in until he was just inches from the old man. "You think you're so wise, huh? Why don't you prove it?" The old man's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with focus. He adjusted his grip on the cane, his movements deliberate. The energy in the air shifted, crackling with tension that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The bus rumbled on, its passengers frozen in anticipation. Slowly the man rose from his seat. Though age had diminished his frame, the way he carried himself made him seem taller, stronger. The boys stared, their curiosity replacing their earlier bravado. "You want me to prove something?" the man asked, his voice calm yet commanding, carrying a weight that demanded attention. His eyes stayed locked on Red Hoodie. "All right, let's talk about proof." Red Hoodie chuckled nervously, instinctively stepping back. "What? You're gonna hit me with that cane?" The man's hand hovered over the cane, but he didn't lift it. "No," he said firmly. "But I will teach you something your mouth clearly hasn't learned. Restraint." The tension in the bus reached its peak, every passenger wide-eyed and silent. The lesson was coming, and no one, not even Red Hoodie, would forget it. Respect is a lesson that life teaches, one way or another. The old man's voice was calm but carried the weight of truth, silencing the bus. Some passengers leaned forward, unwilling to miss a word. The boys, still standing, exchanged uneasy glances. Red Hoodie, unwilling to let his pride falter, spoke up again. "Oh, so now you're the wise one?" he scoffed, his tone trying to mask his unease. "Respect? That's rich, coming from some old guy who's too scared to do anything but talk." The man turned slightly, his steady eyes locking onto the boy. His gaze was firm, unshaken. "You think strength looks like this?" he said, gesturing toward the group. "Posturing? Loud words? Trying to humiliate someone in front of others? That's not strength, that's fear. Fear of being seen for who you really are." The words hit harder than any punch could have. The boys' friends shifted uncomfortably, their bravado cracking under the weight of the man's calm composure. One of them mumbled, "Let's just sit down, man." But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to give in. His pride wouldn't let him. "You don't know anything about me, old man," he shot back. though his voice wavered. "I know more than you think," the man replied evenly. He tapped his cane lightly on the floor. "This cane? It's not just a stick. It's a reminder. Every scar, every ache in these old bones has a story behind it. Stories of battles fought, not with fists, but with courage, discipline, and honor. Those are things you can't understand, because you've never had to earn them." Red Hoodie's confidence faltered. His fists clenched, but he didn't say a word. The man leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Do you know what it's like to watch your friends die? To carry their memory with you every single day, knowing you owe them more than you can ever repay?" The boy blinked, his jaw tightening as if he wanted to respond but couldn't. The bus was silent except for the low hum of the engine. Every passenger was captivated, their eyes glued to the unfolding scene. "You're lucky, kid," the man continued, his voice softening just slightly. "You don't have to learn these lessons the hard way. But if you keep going down this path, disrespecting people, thinking the world owes you something, you'll find out soon enough. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd listened." The boy's face turned red, not with anger, but with shame. His shoulders slumped as he looked away. His friends, too, avoided the man's gaze, their earlier laughter replaced with silence. The bus driver glanced at the scene through the rearview mirror, his hands steady on the wheel. No one else moved. The air was heavy, charged with reflection and regret. The old man straightened, his voice firm as he delivered his final words. "Now take your seat or get off this bus." Red Hoodie hesitated, muttering something under his breath before retreating to his seat. His friends followed, their heads down, their bravado shattered. The tension on the bus began to ease, though the silence lingered. Passengers exchanged quiet looks, some nodding in approval, others in disbelief. The old man remained standing for a moment, his grip on the cane steady, his gaze sweeping over the bus before he returned to his seat. A woman near the front spoke up hesitantly. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but sincere, "that was brave." The man turned to her, offering a small nod. "It wasn't bravery," he said. "It was just what needed to be done." Behind him, Red Hoodie and his friends sat in silence. The boy stared out the window, his arms crossed tightly, while his friends whispered quietly, their voices subdued. They had been shaken, not just by the man's words, but by the realization that actions have consequences. A young man sitting near the back, headphones resting around his neck, broke the silence. "Vietnam, right?" he asked, his tone respectful but unsure. The old man glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said simply. "My grandfather served there," the young man continued. "He never talked about it much, but when he did—" His voice trailed off and he looked down at his hands. "Thank you. For what you did, for what you gave." The old man's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "We all gave something," he said. "Some gave more than others." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. A few passengers nodded quietly, absorbing the depth of his statement. The atmosphere had shifted entirely, from tension to quiet reflection, a shared understanding of what they had just witnessed. One of the boys in the group, the stocky one wearing a backward cap, cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, his voice barely audible, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have said those things." The man turned to him, his expression softening. "Apology accepted," he said. "But remember, respect isn't something you give because someone demands it. You give it because it's the right thing to do." The boy nodded quickly, his face flushed. Red Hoodie stayed silent, shifting uncomfortably, his mind clearly elsewhere. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The old man glanced out the window, tapping his cane once, before rising to his feet. As he made his way to the door, he paused and turned, his voice carrying over the soft hum of the engine. "Kindness and respect cost you nothing," he said, his words addressed to no one in particular, yet meant for everyone. And with that he stepped off the bus, leaving behind silence and a lesson no one on board would soon forget. Speaking to everyone, yet withholding can cost you everything. The door hissed as it opened, and the man stepped off. His walk steady, his presence lingering long after he was gone. The bus remained silent as it moved away from the curb, its passengers lost in thought. They hadn't just witnessed a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in dignity. For some, that lesson would stay with them long after the bus ride ended. The air remained thick with contemplation as the bus continued, and the idle chatter that once filled the space turned to whispers or complete silence. For many on that ride, the old man's words resonated louder than any sound they'd heard all day. Red Hoodie sat hunched in his seat, his once bold posture deflated. His friends avoided eye contact, their faces tinged with guilt and embarrassment. Across the aisle, the young woman who had stayed silent before now gazed out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She had been a bystander like the others, but now she wondered why she hadn't done more. The middle-aged woman near the front took out her phone but didn't use it, her fingers brushing the screen absent-mindedly. The young man at the back, who had talked about his grandfather, closed his eyes and leaned back, deep in thought. It wasn't just a moment for the teenagers. It was a wake-up call for everyone. The lesson wasn't only about respecting elders. It was about acknowledging the weight of someone's journey, the battles they've fought, and the strength it takes to move through life with quiet dignity. As the bus reached its last stop, passengers began to exit, each carrying the moment with them in their own way. The teenagers left together but walked apart, their usual loud energy now replaced by quiet reflection. Red Hoodie paused at the corner, glancing back at the bus before stuffing his hands in his pockets and walking away. For those who remained, the silence spoke volumes. They had witnessed a simple truth. Respect isn't earned through fear or intimidation, but through understanding and compassion. To those reading this, ask yourself, what battles are the people around you facing? How can a single act of kindness or respect change someone's day, or even their life? Remember, everyone you meet has a story you may never know. Treat them with the dignity they deserve. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Together we can spread these lessons and build a kinder, more compassionate world.